Olá, sejam muito bem-vindos a mais um episódio do Podcast Conversas com Propósito. O episódio de hoje é um episódio muito especial. Eu sou André Caldeira, sócio fundador e CEO do Grupo Propósito e também professor do IBGC nos cursos de formação de conselheiros. Esse é o nosso primeiro episódio com um entrevistado em inglês. So, I'll switch to English right away and go ahead to introduce my very special guest today, Jerry Colonna. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, how are you? And thank you for that lovely introduction. I didn't understand a word of it, except especial.
Exactly. Thank you so much for being here with me. So I'm just going to make a more thorough introduction and then we'll start our chat, okay? Mm-hmm. I recently read Jerry's first book, Reboot, Leadership and the Art of Growing Up, which I have here, the version in Portuguese, and was deeply struck by its content, stories, and ability to connect to the reader. After finishing the book, I immediately wrote an article on LinkedIn, inspired by his thoughts, stories, and especially by his vulnerability and insights on self-awareness and purpose. To my surprise, right after posting the article, the very first person who made a comment on LinkedIn was Jerry himself, whom I immediately sent an inbox message inviting to be on the podcast, which he promptly said yes to. Which brings us here today to this very special moment for me and for everyone in the audience. Jerry is the co-founder and CEO of Reboot.io, a coaching company committed to the vision that better humans make better leaders. A company born from the rallying cry that work does not have to destroy us. Work can be the way in which we achieve our fullest self. Prior to this line of work, he was a venture capitalist focused on investing in early-stage technology-related startups. With his partner Fred Wilson, Jerry launched Flatiron in 1996, which became one of the most successful companies specialized in early-stage investment programs. Later, he was a partner with JP Morgan Partners, the private equity firm of JP Morgan Chase. Jerry is a coach, writer, and speaker who focuses on leadership, business, and the practice of radical self-inquiry. He's the author of Reboot, as I showed, Leadership and the Art of Growing Up, published in 2019, and also Reunion, which I have the version here in English, Leadership and the Longing to Belong, which was published at the end of 2023. Jerry helps leaders lead with humanity and equanimity with his unique blend of Buddhism, Jungian therapy, entrepreneurial know-how, and I should add, the ability to connect people to their purpose, which has everything to do with our main theme here at the podcast. So this is the very first episode in English, and I'm going to call it Conversations with Purpose. The original is Conversas com Propósito in Portuguese. Jerry, thank you so much again for being here with us. We always start our episodes with the same question. Please share a moment, a part of your personal history that was fundamental to help define who you are today.
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say thank you. And thank you for that wonderful introduction and for the essay that you wrote. I actually found it quite moving.
Thank you.
Andre, I really appreciate your authenticity and honesty in both writing the essay and really just in the work that you're doing right here.
Thank you.
I have
my honor, really.
I have a sneaking suspicion that you're living into your purpose with this show.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, there are many moments, unfortunately, this is a consequence of being old, right?
How old are you today?
I'll be 62 in December, so 61. And I'm going to be a grandfather in
Really?
November.
Congratulations. Yeah. I'm 57.
Oh, there you go. So I'm still your elder.
Close.
Yeah. And it's if you remember from Reboot, the story of going shopping for sneakers with my daughter, Emma.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So she is 32, married and pregnant. So that's
beautiful.
What happens. Well, there are several moments that kind of shape who I am. Probably the moment that is most pronounced is the moment where I walked away from being a venture capitalist. And that's the moment where you could say I started to manifest the purpose for which I was born. And as I often say, such moments often begin with a broken heart. And as you recall from the book, in 2001, I was a very successful venture capitalist in New York. And really starting the middle of 2001, a lifelong relationship with depression started to catch up with me. And to be very clear, I had had massive depression as a boy, especially growing into late adolescence. And that included a suicide attempt at 18.
Right.
And then hospitalization. And then, as is typical for me, I sort of threw myself into work and threw myself into being a student and threw myself into my 20s, if you will. And by my late 30s, all of the things that I had been avoiding in my pursuit of being a really successful person kind of crept up on me. And by age 38, I was depressed once again and suicidal. And I was working at JP Morgan. And on February 2nd, 2002, just months after the 9/11 attacks, I was in downtown Manhattan, downtown New York, not far from Ground Zero. And I was overwhelmed by desire to once again try to kill myself. And fortunately, I was in therapy at the time with a brilliant psychoanalyst named Dr. Sayers. God rest her soul. She would have turned 100 this year. And I, rather than leaping in front of the subway train, which was the thought in my head, I called her up and I went to see her. And rather than giving into my impulse, which was put me in a hospital, I can't handle life, she suggested that I go on a retreat. And I went on that retreat and took with me 3 books: Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer, When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron, and Faith by Sharon Salzberg. And on that retreat, I began to rebuild my life. And if you have any respect or admiration for the work that I do today, it's precisely because at that moment, I decided to live. I had crashed and I could have kept going, but I turned around and I said, I'm not done yet. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And I'm so grateful for those 3 teachers, all of whom are friends of mine now. But it was, I cite that moment as the moment of the most profound transformation, a kind of Saul on the road to Damascus being struck down turned into Paul.
Right.
And so that's me.
That's such a beautiful and powerful story. Thank you for sharing that with us. I actually have to tell you that after finishing a Reboot, I bought these 3 books. I haven't read them yet, but there's already here back there. I always say, because I'm a serial reader and I buy all kinds of books, and they picked me. So right after I'm done with the reunion, the next one is going to pick me. So they're there. But I can't stand but reflect on the word busyness, because you mentioned that on the book, on Reboot, related to our supposed sense of worth. because we're working all the time, because we're like focusing on making money. Actually, this morning when I went to the gym, I heard you on another podcast talking about the word enough. So perhaps you could expand a little bit on this busyness and the sense of worth that people tend to attach, to the speed and the money and all that. And also the word enough.
Yeah. Well, you
Before I ask you about coaching, of course, which I'll do in a bit.
Yeah. Well, you hit upon two of the more important themes, both in my books, but also in my life and in my work.
Really?
And like everything that I teach or bring forth for my clients, it's rooted in the experiences that I've had myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we look at that first word, busyness, BUSYNESS, it defines a quality, not of being busy, but of a continuous act of being busy. Right. And so if you ask somebody right now, and you can test this out, if you ask somebody right now how they're doing, they'll almost always say one or two words: I'm busy, or I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Or
You
usually
know what
both.
we say here in
What?
Portuguese, but because of course I mispronounce business, but we always say here in Portuguese, estou super corrido, like I'm running all over the place.
Yeah.
Which is, okay, I'm important.
Yeah. Well, you just did something really important there. You just conflated two things. And maybe this is implicit in the Portuguese. But you said, I'm running all over the place.
Right.
I'm so important.
Right.
Okay. And what you did, and maybe this is implicit in that idiom, it's look at how important I am. I'm so important that I can't breathe.
Exactly.
And I'm sorry, but that's crazy.
Yeah.
Right. And in the book, I use another phrase in English. I talk about mistaking motion for meaning.
Right.
Now, if we're here exploring this concept of purpose, it's not a stretch to say we substitute the sense of purpose, of living life with purpose, and all the benefits that come from that, like having a grounded sense of self-worth, of having the time to make a connection with somebody, to have a coffee with a friend, to take a phone call from, a child. We substitute that for, we give up those things in order to fulfill this hole in our chest that says to us we're not enough. That's why it was actually quite clever of you to make the connection between busyness and enoughness. Right? We mistake motion with self-worth. And the result is that we're always running around. And what are we looking for? We're looking for the benefits that come from living a life of purpose. We're looking for how does it feel to wake up and, I'll tell you how it feels to wake up. I was in Barcelona last week teaching at IEC, the business school there. And I said to class of students, because they were asking about this transition that I've made. And I said, I feel as if I am the luckiest person alive because I am living exactly as God intended me to live. That's an amazing statement.
Exactly.
And so when we live close to our purpose, when we live connected to meaning, when we live in a way where every conversation enlivens us. When I put my head down at the pillow at night, I often think of the words of the poet David White, in which he says, "Good work done well for the right reasons."
I think I read that on Reunion, right?
Yeah. And it's all over our website. That's right.
Oh, yeah,
That's right.
maybe.
Yeah.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful. You know, I have to say, I feel in my body, in my heart, that I had to be here now, right now with you, listening to this and trying to create this chamber of inspiration for so many people. I happen to be a teacher at what we call here in Brazil, the Brazilian Corporate Governance Institute, meaning that, you know, it's a school for boards of directors. And we always use this expression, tone at the top, meaning that the board of directors is directly responsible for choosing, for hiring, for supporting the CEO, which makes the tone at the top. And the importance of a leader who understands what you just said is humongous for organizational culture, for people to feel connected to the company's mission, which goes way beyond money. Which leads me to my next question to you. You were a venture capitalist. So for some people, you are some sort of a hero, which made a lot of money, really successful, but still, after all the money you made, you still face depression and lacked meaning. Could you perhaps expand a little bit more on that for us?
I can. And at some point, I'd like to circle back to the tone at the top.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And the work you do and the purpose behind that. In fact, let me jump to that first.
Sure.
So, as I said, I was in Barcelona last week. And I'm now teaching in a non-degree certificate program called the School of Founders. Now, I've been teaching there every 6 months for the last 3 years. And I've been spending more and more time with the degree granting side of the institution in the MBA program. And I had a meeting with the dean last week. And we were talking. I was giving him my impression of the school. And I want to acknowledge, I'm from the United States. I grew up in Brooklyn. I live in Colorado. And I want to acknowledge that this is a very, very difficult moment for the United States.
For the nation.
Right
actually for the world, but specifically for the nation. Right.
Exactly. Because of what's going on in the United States for the world. Right. And there is a kind of implicit war on empathy and compassion that's going on. And as a consequence, there is a kind of denigration of exactly what you were talking about in terms of the tone at the top. And I'll give you just one slice of that for a moment. When I was talking to the dean last week, I said to him, so AEC is a unit of the University of Navarra, which was founded as a Catholic university, and it's the seat of Opus Dei. And now I'm not a Catholic. I was born, raised a Catholic, but I converted to Buddhism, such as one converts to Buddhism, many years ago. But I profoundly respect the ethics and morality that are implicit in most spiritual traditions. And the thing that I noticed about that school, and the thing that I felt freer to do last week when I was out of the United States, was make the connection between ethics and good governance. to the tone that you're talking about. And I would argue that the kind of self-awareness and self-exploration implicit in my phrase, radical self-inquiry, is the root of good ethics. Because by holding ourselves steady, we access our conscience. We know that there's right and wrong. We know it may be gray in certain areas and in certain decisions. Excuse me. But we know that we should treat our employees well. We know that we should be good corporate citizens. We know that we should leave the world a better place than we found it. And that those of us who are privileged enough to hold power through an organization have a moral and ethical responsibility to address inequity and marginalization wherever it appears. And that what's really amazing about organizational strength and businesses is that not only can they be a vehicle for my own personal development as a human, as an adult, but they can be a vehicle for positive change in society. And we don't have to choose to be profitable and to be of service. We can do both.
Right.
And the key, and you know this, the key is staying connected to purpose. So I want to pause before I jump to your other question, but I did feel that was really important to say that. So yes, you have a response on that.
I was just going to add this quote from Peter Senge on The Fifth Discipline, in which it says, "A company does not survive without profit or cash flow. We as humans don't survive without oxygen, but we don't live to breathe only. A company does not exist to generate cash only."
Yeah. I'll give you my interpretation of that. I always talk about what I call content and container. Right. So a container is the business itself. It's the structure. It's the P&L statement. It's the go-to-market strategy. It's the quality of the product. It's the relationship with the customers even. Companies that have leaky containers can't exist.
Yeah.
But companies that have containers that lack content, and content isn't necessarily your product. Content is the why of your business, the values of your business, the ethics of your business, the purpose of your leadership. Companies that lack content are meaningless. But the corollary is true. Content that lacks meaningful container cannot be consumed.
Perfect.
And so many of our institutions, spiritual institutions, nonprofit institutions, lack healthy containers. And what's interesting about businesses is that we can build businesses that have healthy containers and meaningful content. And I will always pause when I point that out and say, I know that's hard. I know that's hard. But easy isn't for us as leaders.
Right.
We're supposed to do the hard things. That's why God put us on this planet. To do the hard things. To save the rainforest and create economic opportunity. Those are not in opposition.
Right.
They can work together. And I'm still tracking your second question about being a VC, but keep going.
No. Let's go back. Let's circle back to that one. And I can't help but think of the hungry ghosts you mentioned, which have a connection to the word enough. And to that moment of time in which you face this serious depression after having made probably quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could go back to that moment and share that with us.
Yeah. Well, you rightly point out that in my early 30s, what was projected onto me was a particular kind of success. That was the story. And as I wrote in Reboot, Fred and I were called the Princes of New York.
Right.
And you're right. We kind of had a dream job. If there are any young MBA students listening to this show right now, you're probably sitting there saying, boy, I would love to be a VC. And boy, it would be great because here's my plan. My plan is going to be, I'm going to make a lot of money and then I'm going to do good work in the world. What we often refer to as the life deferment plan. Right?
Yeah.
I'm going to make money and then I'm going to have a life of purpose and then I'm going to be happy and all those things. Okay. So I'm a cautionary tale.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In that the more success I felt as a VC, the more I felt that projection onto me, the more of a hungry ghost I felt I was. And you're right to sort of lift up that image. So just to describe it, it's an image from Buddhist folklore.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to hold that image, a hungry ghost. So imagine this figure that you can't really touch, that's just like transparent, that is constantly hungry, never satiated, and consumes because you're right. They don't have a sense of enoughness. They can't tell you that I am okay just as I am. And I was a hungry ghost.
I can't help to relate in my mind sort of a crazy link to Harry Potter's Dementors.
That's right. The soul-sucking Dementors. That's
Right.
the image. That's right. That's right. And J.K. Rowling was brilliant in making that connection.
Right.
That those Dementors would literally suck the soul out of somebody.
Right.
And they could suck your soul and have to move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. And that if you want an image for a hungry ghost, that's a brilliant image.
Right.
And so much of what we define as greed in the world stems from that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because you could be the richest man in the world. We see this. And it's still not enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's still not enough to look at myself and say, I'm just going to turn around and do good.
Yeah.
No, I have to attack people. Right? There are plenty of self-actualized wealthy people.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is not wealth. The problem is a lack of a sense of enoughness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been quoting the Bible a lot, or Christianity a lot lately. There's an old line that people misquote from the Bible, from the New Testament, which is that money is the root of all evil.
Mm.
But what St. Paul actually wrote in one of his letters to the Corinthians is love of money is the root of all evil.
Mm.
And that's a profound difference.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
what he's speaking about is greed, a lack of enoughness, the masking of busyness to create a sense of worth. See, when we were talking before about living a life of purpose, one of the things that living a life of purpose can do is give you a persistent sense of enoughness. I'll give you a perfect example from our mutual and growing friendship. One day I'm on LinkedIn and I get notice that I've been tagged in a piece. And I believe the piece was originally written in Portuguese. So I had to hit translate now.
Right.
And I read this blog post. And I said, this is a brother from another mother. This is kinfolk. Thousands of miles away. He read my story and he said what I wrote about in Reunion. Your story is my story. How beautiful is that?
Thank you. Get emotional with this. Thank you.
Welcome to my world. Okay. Because one of the consequences of living close to purpose is you live close to the fullness of your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Or to put it another way, you live close to the fullness of your humanity. And because you stepped into your humanity and read of my story with a broken, open heart, which is a reference to the book, you then got to be more fully actualized as a human being. And boy, isn't that a warrior for purpose? You, right there. That's why we're having this conversation today, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jerry, again. There's so much more, to this because while I was reading your book, Reboot, I had to take it to my therapy sessions at least 5 times and reread out loud some of the parts because I felt my therapist's name is Fernanda. I would say to her, this is me.
Well,
This guy is reading my life.
yeah. Let's just pause. Let's just pause and feel that.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. What was her response?
Say more.
Classic therapist. Yeah.
But in a very
a loving way.
Yes. Really, really special.
And when you would say more, tell me, say more. Here I go, because I'm a coach.
Right.
How did it feel to read your life in the words of someone else?
I was actually afraid you would start asking me questions because I heard, no, I'm joking.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead. I couldn't help but try to answer questions such as, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
That's a heavy one on me, because of my story with my father.
God
bless
him.
And also, what are the options you have related to the pain that once was closed? You also talk about that on the book.
Mm-hmm.
Now that you not acknowledge what you went through, but you're not the kid, the boy anymore. You're the adult. So you talk about I think it's loyal soldier.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that part, the crow and the loyal soldier, perhaps you could expand because some people haven't read the book yet, but they will for sure after this, as a means of protection.
Mm-hmm.
So there was so much insight in your book for me. That's why I reached out and said, I have to try to interview Jerry because this is really, really kind and true.
So thank you for all of that. And thank you for letting me know about the effect. And it warms my heart to know that you brought the book into your therapy sessions. And
right.
Let's suggest that your therapist read the book as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, let me describe loyal soldier. Let me describe what I call the crow, because that's my term, and relate them back to the inner critic. So, in the early 1970s, a Japanese soldier was discovered on an island in the Philippines. This is a true story. And he had survived since World War II. Absolutely convinced that the war was still going on.
70s.
And he was doing his part to defend the homeland. He was protecting that rock in the Pacific. I have no idea how he fed himself and took care of himself, but he was found. And I don't recall who the psychologist was who first used that as a metaphor to describe the strategies from our childhood that we develop to defend the homeland, to defend ourselves. A strategy might be, I'm always going to be a people pleaser. Or a strategy is going to be, I'm going to repress my anger and turn it into anxiety and get really nervous and anxious and guilty. What's important about the loyal soldier story is what happened. When the Japanese discovered this fellow, they welcomed him home. They had a parade for him. They said, thank you for defending the homeland. They didn't mock him. And importantly, for self-development work, they didn't make him feel ashamed. Because in my experience, one of the challenges of a lot of self-development, self-inquiry process has the unintended consequence of evoking shame. Right. So we'll go to the other metaphor I use, which is the crow. When I was in college, I had a poetry teacher. I'm a big fan of poetry, and writing and words have been a profound way for me to make sense of the world and to express myself. And her name was Marie Poncet. And we would write poetry, and she would always say, like we would read a poem aloud, and she'd say, wow, or pow, that's amazing, right? She was wonderful. And she would also advise us, as we were struggling to be writers, to not really listen to what you would call the crow who sits on your shoulder telling you what a terrible person you are. You are a terrible writer. What an idiot you are, right? The sort of inner critic constantly speaking to us. And she used to say, shoot the fucking crow, in order to just sort of go forward. So I thought about that for a long time. And I thought about the loyal soldier. And I thought about the way the Japanese society welcomed that soldier home. And I realized that crow that sits on my shoulder is actually trying to do exactly the same thing that the soldier was trying to do. Defend the homeland. Protect me against shame. Protect me against someone reading a poem I wrote and saying, this is a terrible poem. I can't believe you. Who do you think you are? There's that line, right? And the job of the crow is the same job of the soldier, which is to protect us. Especially us as little kids. And so I shifted that language from shoot the crow to love the crow. Blow it a kiss. Tell it thank you. But importantly, just like the Japanese did with the loyal soldier, the war is over. You don't have to defend me. I can take someone reading a poem of mine or a book of mine and saying, yeah, not for me. I can take that. Because I know that just as I am, I'm enough. I don't need that external validation. And so the crow can stand down and the soldier can put their gun down. And I'm just okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that in order to do that, you have to look inward and look for the Japanese inside you.
That's right.
right? To find the pain, to open the pain, to acknowledge what you went through. And that's why, therapy is so key in all this, which was really important to me when I was reading your book, because you're this former venture capitalist, which who made a lot of money and now works as a coach writing these beautiful books. Why coaching? If you could add to everything we've been saying.
Well, the first thing I would say is you're right, that internal inquiry process to find, as you put it, the Japanese soldier is really an important part of the process. It's a way of putting to rest those old, what I call subroutines, those old patterns that we learn as children to keep us safe. As you know from the book, before I can answer the why coaching question, I should answer the why venture capitalist question. And as you remember, as a boy, I grew up with enormous amount of poverty and violence and deep challenges in the family system. And a really important character in my life was my grandfather, my father's father, who always seemed to have enough. And one of the manifestations of that was he seemed to have an endless supply of lemon drop candy, little sweet little candies. And he had this green doored pantry outside the kitchen, and there was always a tin filled with lemon drops because he loved them. And in my mind, his having enough money, his having his own home, his having enough food was merged with lemon drops. And so part of the reason I pursued being a venture capitalist, part of the unconscious motivation, subroutine, was to try to have enough money that I could finally feel safe. I could finally feel enough. When that system failed and was sort of laid bare as the inadequate system that it is, what I began to tap into was a deeper sense of meaning and purpose for myself. And so I don't coach because it's a mechanism for lemon drops. I coach because it's an outgrowth of who I am. The reason I get on a podcast and I can't help myself but sound like your therapist is because I am the same person always. That doesn't mean I'm always consistent or within integrity. I have my challenges.
No, I hear you.
But the guy I show up on your podcast is the same guy I show up on Tim Ferriss's podcast, is the same guy who was walking the streets of Barcelona last week, is the same guy that I was in conversation with a client just an hour ago. Because when we live with a sense of purpose, and in my case, my purpose is to alleviate suffering and to lift up the possibility that business leadership can be this means of change within ourselves and change in the world. That's my unique selling proposition, my USP. That's my unique position. So that's why I coach. I coach because I don't have a choice. Just like I write because I don't have a choice. This is who I am.
And how did you find out about your purpose in terms of alleviating suffering for other people? Through your own suffering,
Yes.
That's
Yes. Literally everything that I do is an outgrowth of my own internal work. Why did I become a coach and not become a therapist? Because there's a very, very important part of my experience of me that is a business person.
the former you, right?
That's right. That's right. So you asked, how did I find it? Kind of in a circuitous, circling around experience. Paying attention to what gave me life. What conversations created meaning for me. I'll say this because we've been talking about my books. In my heart of hearts, I was always a writer. But until Reboot came out, I wasn't an author. Right? And there's a difference between those two words in English. Writer means one who writes. Author means one who has been published.
You see.
Okay. And that too is an expression of my purpose. When I get a note from a random stranger who's read my book in Portuguese, telling me your story is my story, or telling me that he's bringing my book into his therapy sessions, that's me living into my purpose. Because my purpose, I mean, in that brief moment, I'm imagining, you tell me if I'm wrong, I alleviated just a little bit of your suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because guess what?
You did way more than that, Jerry. You enlightened my life. That's what you did.
Don't make me cry.
Seriously. I have to share with you. This is my first book. It says it's like lots of work and little stress. It's the story of a workaholic called Joe Labor. And the drawings in the book were made by my son. I don't know if you're, let's see.
Yeah, let's see the other one.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
look at how sad Joe is.
Right. Exactly.
Joe is very sad, but he's got a mouse on his laptop. I like that.
Right. And he's traveling all over the place and he's drinking way too much and, he's unfulfilled and all that. And this was my first book, published in 2013. And then my daughter, the drawings were done by my son, Lucas, who's now 23. Clara, my daughter, is 19. So she was probably, let's say, 16, 11, 10. And she would say, Daddy, when are you going to write your next book? Because I'm the one who's going to do the drawing. And then I published The Executive, The Hero, and Courage. And so these are her drawings. I write stories, and I'm finishing up my third book. So we have lots in common because deep inside me, I have always been a writer.
Right.
And so your story is my story. I have to say that.
Right. The first of all, I really appreciate the fact that you integrated your children into your work. And what that's telling me is that you being a good father, even if at times you struggled to be a good father, was a really important issue for you. And we'll just blow a kiss to your dad, who's off in the corner over there, right? And so much of a man's journey into significant adulthood is coming into a relationship with their father.
Yeah.
And for those of us lucky enough, being the father that we always needed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
Let's switch lanes a little bit here. I often talk here in my classes, lectures and stuff about important differences between having in the sense of achieving and being. And also a common trap of a leader who gets confused by being a position versus being in a position. Do you see success as sort of an oasis in the desert, some sort of an illusion trap?
now I understand your reference to Oasis, because my first impression was, oh, it's the sanctuary, it's the place to go. But I think
Oh,
you're talking about the mirage. You're talking
right.
about
Exactly.
right, the
Unattainable.
illusion. Yeah.
The hungry ghost parallel.
Well, let me reframe the question a little bit, because I think what you're asking is success a mirage? And let's unpack that a little bit, because I think we're in agreement about something really important. And that is, when you achieve what you think what you would define as success, you find it's empty. In the United States, there's a tradition. We have what's called a merry-go-round. I don't know how you would say it in Portuguese.
Yeah.
Okay. And in the old days, you would go around and you would reach out and try to grab a brass ring every time you passed it. And if you got the brass ring, you could trade it in for a prize. And that led to this idiom where you said, I've got the brass ring. Okay. And in my 30s, I thought the brass ring was monetary success. Many people think the brass ring is title. Some people think the brass ring is power. And so what they're defining as success is an external affirming structure. Right? I have a friend whose father was incredibly successful, and his manifestation of success would be if his picture was on the cover of this very famous business magazine in the country he grew up in. Right? So not only is it external success, but it's also outdoing his father.
Yeah.
Right? So we're starting to circle around the answer to your question. And you've been in therapy, so you will grok this. Pursuit of the brass ring without the kind of radical self-inquiry that's implicit in the question of, what does success mean for you? Right? So let me take a step back. Success is not a problem. I consider myself not only lucky, but successful. And I'm successful not because I've written 2 best-selling books, but because I wrote a book that moved your heart thousands of miles away from me. I consider myself successful because I touch hearts every day. I consider myself successful because in a couple of weeks, my 28-year-old son and I are going to get into my camping van, point it south, and go camping. And I have no idea where we're going. But my 28-year-old wants to spend time with me. That's success. So, in business literature, we often talk about measure what matters. We talk about, identifying the metrics and then measuring the steps to getting there. To me, what kind of life do you want to live? Right now, I'm thinking a lot about my next book, and I'm thinking a lot about legacy. When I'm done, when this body turns to dust, what is it that I want people to say? 20 years from now, God willing, someone's going to stumble upon my book Reboot or my book Reunion in a used bookstore. And it's going to be kind of moldy and dusty. And then they're going to take it home and they're going to read it. And they're going to call up a friend and they're going to say, you won't believe this book. This book told the story of my life.
True.
That's success for me. That is what matters. I'll tell you a story. I need to say one more thing. A few months ago, I went to visit my friend Parker Palmer.
Mhm.
And you know, from reading the book, he's one of the most important influences in my life.
Yeah.
He's 86, and his book saved my life.
Mm.
Set me right on my path. And I spent the weekend sitting in his back porch laughing my butt off with him.
Mhm.
And I came away with this phrase: what matters is what matters. I can't flip it. It says, what
yeah.
matters is what matters.
Is what matters.
And that's a way of reminding, just like your books are for you, what matters in the world. What matters is, am I kind? Have I managed my sense of self such that I don't inflict harm on other people? Do I leave a conversation with the other person feeling uplifted, even if I made them cry? These are the things that matter. This is how I want to spend the next 30 years of my life, doing this work. I have no idea if I answered your question, but
You totally did, because what I asked you was about the confusion executives tend to make between a position and a person. We have a difference in terms of verbs here in Portuguese. When I say you act as a CEO or you are a CEO, which in English doesn't sound quite the same way. But the key point is success, which is not fame, power, money, the position itself, but what you make out of it with your essence in order to impact people around you, your family, and perhaps the world.
That's right.
Which is what you just said. Makes total sense to me. I have to ask you about meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Doing the math here in my mind, it's probably been more than 20 years you meditate every day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a keen meditator, not for as long as you, but every morning I sit for at least 45 minutes and I have my ritual and I connect to, my higher self. I was in India for a month in February. So all sorts of, I would say, expansions have been happening in my consciousness, which started to self-inquiry, to paying attention to me. And then, as it turns out, it's like, when you didn't have a child, or a son or a daughter, you never pay too much attention to, baby strollers and all that. Once you have your first son, you start realizing, oh my God, there are plenty of kids in the world. And you're kinder to people who have, kids screaming or crying and stuff. Crazy parallel in my mind to say, I pay attention to people who say they meditate. First, because they are honoring the inward trip, which is outward at the same time, right? And second, like you, because you have the vulnerability and at the same time the courage, Brené Brown says they're the same thing, to bring spirituality into the workplace. Can you expand a little bit on that? Meditation and your experience with that?
Sure. I think you describe it well. And I think from your own experience, you understand what having a grounded relationship with self, that meditation can give you, what it does for your life. And I suppose you're right. I do bring spirituality, not religion per se, but that deeper sense of connectedness.
Right.
I it's not unlike what I was saying before about my travels in Spain last week. I'm finding, I find there is an openness. I'll give you an example of it. I tend not to use the word vulnerability. I tend to use the word, because it's very loaded. I tend to use the word honest. See, when you say to someone, how do you feel about being vulnerable? They get very defensive.
Yeah.
But if I say to them, how do you feel about being honest?
There's no weakness to it.
There's no weakness in that. That's right. That's right. Now, being honest may require a kind of vulnerability. And what I have found is that if you can help people connect not only with purpose, but an inner sense of spirituality, they're more inner and outer aligned and come across as more honest and trustworthy. That doesn't mean spiritual people are more trustworthy. It means that people who have inner and outer congruence are more trustworthy. And spirituality often is a path to that.
Did you find some sort of resistance from the corporate world when you talk about these experiences, these take?
I'm going to reflect back. I can't help it. The first question was, you described me bringing spirituality in as an act of courage and an act of vulnerability. And now you're interested in resistance. What's been your experience?
My experience
How do you
is
feel about bringing that in? Yeah.
I think you have to use the right language according to the audience. Because for some folks, if you talk spirituality, they're going to say, what? Are you an alien? Get out of here. So you talk about better leaders or people that know themselves better. And then for some others, you can talk about, expanding the consciousness. And for some others, you can talk about spirituality.
So I would argue
it's sort of the same.
Yeah.
But I'm always, I'm paying attention to resistance because I want to try a way to, go by it and get to my destination, I should say.
Well, look, so thank you, because that helped land me in what it was that you were reaching for. And I think that broadly speaking, whether the topic is spirituality or the topic is radical self-inquiry or the topic is authenticity or the topic is vulnerability, you're always going to find resistance. Because that resistance is actually rooted in the same thing that the loyal soldier and the crow are rooted in.
Right.
Which is, whoa, this is, I don't know. This could make me get hurt.
Right.
Okay. Now it shows up in sometimes a kind of false machismo, or it can show up in a kind of denigration of wokeness. I don't know if you use that term in Brazil, but it's our job is to smuggle in these concepts by any means necessary. So yes, I encounter resistance, and yes, I know how to overcome resistance. And one of the best ways to overcome resistance is not to confront it directly, but sidle up next to it and say, so, how are your employees feeling? Oh, they're miserable. Well, that's interesting. How are you feeling when you get home on the weekend? Oh, I'm terrible. I drink too much. I'm fighting with my spouse. Oh, interesting. What would it take to make those things easier for people? Oh, okay. Might that improve customer service, right? I'll use whatever mechanism is necessary to help somebody move along. Because remember, that resistance, part of what they're resisting is actually feeling better. And if my job is to be a first responder to suffering, then my job is to figure out what the resistance is and help them regardless.
There's a beautiful part of your book in which you write, how would we feel if our children worked for the company we created or the team we lead? Which is also a way of, sort of like cracking the wall and getting to the human being on the other side of the question.
Well, why do you think it works? Why do you think it cracks the wall? What am I doing?
You're connecting to the heart. You're going beyond the mind. You're talking, you're reaching to the love that this person should probably feels for the children.
Right.
So you put on different lenses.
Right. So
it's to start a different dialogue.
Right. You see what I was doing. Let me elaborate a little bit more. In my experience as a coach, if I say to an executive, for example, how do you feel about working for the company? Part of what can get triggered is an old subroutine, which is that work is supposed to be difficult and painful. It's supposed to be a dreadful obligation. That's what my father went through. And so if I go at it directly like that, I'm going to use the term before, I'm going to meet the resistance.
Right.
Okay, well, it sucks, but it's supposed to suck. Okay, man up. Right. But if I say, well, how would you feel if your son or your daughter was miserable going to work and taking it out on their spouses or taking it out on their children? Oh, wait a minute. I didn't sign up for that. Yeah. So it's actually a subversive question. It's designed to get past that resistance, which is, I'm supposed to be in pain. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the crazy part, Andre. A lot of us walk around in adulthood thinking we're supposed to feel pain. We're not even entitled to feel. This is normal. We're supposed to feel busy. We're supposed to feel exhausted. We're supposed to be unhappy. And then we're supposed to die. Literally, every spiritual tradition in the world, every wisdom tradition in the world says the opposite.
Right.
Now, there are things you're supposed to do. You're supposed to sacrifice for the greater good. But that doesn't mean you're supposed to be miserable. Everything is pointing to a path of contentment, not happiness per se, but equanimity.
Equanimity, yes.
Contentment.
I was actually talking about that word over lunch today. I'm 3 hours ahead of you with my children. You guys know what equanimity is? And then we were talking, about the meaning of equanimity.
Is there a Portuguese translation for that word?
It's equanimidade, but it's not a common word, People tend to use resilience, which is not the same thing. Exactly. Right. So.
And what did your children say?
They were really interested and also very excited because I was going to talk to Jerry. It seems that like they know you, because they know about the book. They know that you responded to my message. So this is a special moment, not only for me, but for my family as well.
You're going to have to send me your address separately, and I'll send some signed books for everybody.
Oh, thank you. And I'll send you the T-shirt that my son, he's a designer. So he created a T-shirt with conversations with purpose art And so I'll send you the T-shirt, which I send to all my interviewees here.
Great.
So last question of this part, and then we'll jump to the questions that I ask every single one of my guests here. What advice would you give with all the experience you have today to the young Jerry back then when you were 20-something years and were starting off your career?
It's going to be okay. That's it. And now I'm thinking of your children, so let me talk to them for a moment. It's a scary world. It's a really scary world. And trying to find our place in it, trying to find purpose and meaning is hard. But whether you sit in meditation or you walk in meditation, if you sit still and listen to that quiet, still voice inside of you, you're going to find your way through. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be okay. And we as a species are going to be okay. We may be in for some rough times, but we're going to be okay. That's what I would tell myself right now. And the truth is, I do tell myself that kind of every day.
Beautiful, Jared. Beautiful. So let's jump to the last part of this episode. Please complete the following sentence. Purpose is?
Everything. Mm-hmm. Everything.
2 or 3 words that help me understand your personal purpose.
Oh, I mentioned it before. I am organized to alleviate suffering. In Buddhism, we have what's called the bodhisattva vow.
Bodhisattva. Mm-hmm.
Right. And as you may know, the bodhisattva commits to not take rebirth, to not, or to not pass into nirvana, mm-hmm. but to take rebirth until all beings are free of suffering. Mm-hmm. So if you think about that for a moment, what the bodhisattva is saying is, I myself will voluntarily choose to continue to suffer until all beings are free of suffering. Whew, that's a heady purpose. But it grounds me. Oh, I know what I have to do. I have to help people. Right. In a particular way, in a particular form, in a particular style.
Let me tell you, you are doing that right now. I'm sure.
God bless you.
I'm sure. Who would you mention as a guiding figure in your life? Parent, teacher, mentor. Why this person, and what have you learned from them?
Well, I mentioned him before, Parker Palmer.
Harvard.
And his book, Let Your Life Speak. And what I will say is, and I think you can relate to this a little bit, when he wrote about his struggles with depression, it was liberating for me. Because here was somebody that I admired who spoke honestly about the things that he struggled with. Mm-hmm. And he spoke with an eloquence that touched me. And he was the first person that I could say, well, your story is my story. Now, he and Sharon Salzberg, whose wonderful book, Faith, which is probably her least well-known book, but it's the most personal. Both of them kind of acted as guides for me. Like, come on, this is the way. And it's going to be okay.
Uh-huh. So you already answered another question that I was going to pose ahead, which was a book that was really important for you. Any other one? Other ones?
I mentioned all 3 before. The third, the reason I always include When Things Fall Apart, the most liberating part of that book for me was the realization that so much of my suffering stems from trying to resist what the Buddhists would say is impermanence.
Right.
Things always fall apart. Here's a good expression of it. You said your daughter's 19.
Right.
What's her first name?
Clara.
So remember when she was a little kid?
Mm-hmm.
Remember how painful it feels to know that she's no longer that little kid?
Mm-hmm.
That's falling apart.
Yeah.
But what's beautiful about that is the young woman that she is becoming. Right. So impermanence is bittersweet.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can see the joy in that, if we can see the gift in that, then we have a little bit less suffering going on.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. If you could invite anyone in the world, living or dead, for a meal and a good conversation, who would they be and why?
No one's ever asked that question before. There's a lot of people. Bruce Springsteen. Barack Obama.
Uh-huh.
Carl Jung.
Mm-hmm.
What I would ask Bruce about
Uh-huh.
is his own experience in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Because in his autobiography, he talks about having spent 25 years in psychoanalysis.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest with you, that blew me away.
Mm-hmm.
To think that a guy like him could be that vulnerable and honest was really sweet.
Beautiful. What's the best or the worst piece of advice you ever received?
You'll remember this from Reboot. My father's advice to me that the higher up the pole the monkey climbs, the more his ass shows. In some ways, it was both the best and the worst. It was the worst, and it's like, are you kidding me? Are you telling me don't climb the pole? Which is yes. And yet it was the best advice because it was so compelling to me to do the opposite.
Yeah.
So.
And the best advice?
I am enough.
Mm.
It's less advice and more an observation. And that, I would say, is something I took away from 30 years of psychoanalysis with Dr. Sayers. But I'll expand upon that. It's the notion that as people, we can hold multiple competing, conflicting thoughts simultaneously. We can love and hate at the same time. And that to be able to embrace all of that, probably the sense that I'm enough and that I'll be okay.
I thought you were going to say, which I would say to you, write, Jerry, write.
Oh, thank you.
Please write more.
Thank you. That's very, very kind of you. Here, I'll show you something that my sister gave me. And I don't know if you'll be able to read it, but it's a little magnetic paperweight, and it says, write every day.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Which I do.
Mm-hmm. You do?
Yeah.
You write? Yeah. Oh, as your journal. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But for instance, the next book you're thinking about, you're already putting together some parts. You're already like in the process. Beautiful. Beautiful. Can't wait to have that one.
Oh, thank you.
If you had magical powers for 1 minute and could change one single thing in the world, what would it be?
To have people sit and meditate every day.
Beautiful. Never had that answer before.
I have a friend who, before she started meditating herself, once said to me, "You Buddhists, you think everybody should just sit down and meditate every day? then what's going to happen? What do you think? We're all going to just be happy? It's like, yeah, I do.
It's very important to me when you wrote in the book, the courage to sit still.
Right.
That's a beautiful sentence. Beautiful.
Well, Blaise Pascal said, all of man's problems stem from his inability to sit alone in a room. Or sit quietly alone in a room.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same feeling. It's just
Right.
like, can I be alone with my own thoughts?
Mm-hmm. What question would you have for me in this conversation?
What is your hope for our conversation? What would you like to see happen?
I wish that dozens of thousands of people watch this and are touched at least by, 10% of the power of your work and the impact that has had on me. Because this project is about purpose, is about dialogue, and is about inspiration. Because of the dark times you mentioned before, my purpose here is to bring light to people, to careers, to teams, to organizations, and perhaps to society.
May it be so.
You also you talked a little bit about whenever you're gone, you're not on this existence any longer. The fact that people would find your books and stuff, but if they remembered you, Jerry, the person, say, your great-grandchildren and their friends, for what would you want to be remembered? What kind of legacy you wish you may help create?
Well, I write about that a lot in Reunion, so I'll just summarize it. And I'll speak again to the times that we live in. These are divisive times. These are difficult times. Those in power seem to be exploiting that which we find fearful about the others. I would like my descendants to know, in order to be the ancestor that my descendants deserve, I would like them to think that I tried my best to make the world a little bit better. Doesn't mean I succeeded. There's I quote in Reunion, I quote from the Talmud, and Rabbi Tarfon says in the Talmud, it is not yours to complete the work, but neither are you at liberty to ignore the work. And I would like people to know that I did not ignore the work. I may not succeed, but I'll be damned if I don't try.
Right. Beautiful. I don't know how many times I said the word beautiful in this conversation, but
I enjoy it every time you do.
It's the one that keeps coming back to my mind. When you started writing Reboot, did it ever cross your mind that some foreigner, a stranger from Brazil, have you ever been to Brazil?
I have never been, not yet.
Oh, we have an idea here as well. But did it cross your mind that maybe this book is going to be read by this guy in Brazil and I'm going to be recording?
Not at all.
And in this podcast.
Not in the least. In fact, I write about this in Reunion. In the months following the release of Reboot, I kept having this experience over and over again. I was in Denver Colorado doing a book reading, and this older woman, mid-80s, came up to me and she said, "You look like our speaker." And I said, "Well, that's because I am your speaker." She laughed and she stuck out her hand and she said, "My name is Margaret, and I read your book, and your story is my story." Right? She grew up in Nebraska, very different place than Brooklyn. And months later, I was in Ireland, and it was a room full of white people, one black woman sitting in the front row. And she was taking notes furiously. And at the very end, she comes up to me. She starts telling me her story. Her father had passed away, and he was killed on Robben Island when she was 13. And he was a freedom fighter based in Zimbabwe, working against apartheid in South Africa. And he was killed by the police. And she said to me, "I read Reboot, and your story is my story." I am in shock. I mean, here it's happening again. And I'll confess, I didn't even know the book had been translated into Portuguese yet. Okay. I had no idea how universal these feelings are. And the reason I wrote so much about your story is my story in Reunion is I see that as a means of overcoming divisiveness and separateness. Because if I could look at you thousands of miles away and hear that your story is my story, I can't hate you. I can't want to murder you.
There's no otherness.
There is no otherness. There is only usness. That's right. That's right.
And so, again, this is the book in Portuguese, Reiniciar, a liderança e a arte de crescer. I have to thank Samira Porto. She's a client of ours and HR director for Supremo Sucesso. And she was the one who suggested me your book. But I usually buy the books that people suggest me and they pick me. So yours picked me. I read it and I wrote the article, and then she made a comment on LinkedIn right after you. "Oh, I'm so glad you liked it." I said, "You did it. Thank you so much." So, I have to publicly thank her for this.
Well, we both have to thank her. We both have to thank her. And my question is, how did she find the book?
Yes. Now we have
no
to
idea.
Yes.
You'll have to email her and ask her.
Right. Okay. But I won't forget the idea of maybe bringing Jerry to Brazil for some work, or I don't know.
I would be delighted.
Let's talk about that later. Jerry, last question. Please share a quote or a message that's important in your life.
There's so many quotes.
Right.
Here.
Take your time.
This is the epigraph to Reunion. And I would just say Reunion, the subtitle of Reunion is Leadership and the Longing to Belong. And it's about, there we go. And this is the epigraph. There lies the longing to know and be known by another fully and humanly. And that beneath that there lies a longing closer to the heart of the matter still, which is the longing to be at long last where you fully belong. Frederick Buechner, The Longing for Home.
Wow.
That comes to mind. Yeah, wow, right. One of the things that makes your story my story is that we both have a longing to belong, to know where we at long last can feel at home. And if we can recognize the universality of that experience, maybe, just maybe, the world can be a little bit more peaceful.
I'm in awe here. And I think from now on, I'm going to have to call you Mr. Mirror, because your story is my story, Mr. Mirror.
Amen.
Thank
brother.
you so much.
Thank
So
you.
much. Thank you. As soon as we have the episode on, I'll let you know. Thank you so much for your time. Now I'm going to switch to Portuguese just to thank my audience here. Muito obrigado a você que assistiu mais esse episódio, um episódio muito especial em inglês, o primeiro de outros que certamente virou. Se você gostou, eu peço que você comente, que você curta, que você compartilhe. Vamos juntos ecoar mais propósito, mais diálogo e mais inspiração. Muito obrigado e até o próximo episódio.